Oh, recording has started. Yes, very good. So I would like to start by saying that I do not have slides because this is not really a type of presentation which I am, normally doing. As a matter of fact, it is the first time that I'm asked to give such a presentation. So I regard this not so much as a real presentation, but more as a Q&A session. In the sense that I understand that we have like 1 hour and a half at our disposal. So what I would do would be to start with some general considerations about what are the topics which I think enter into this discussion from the point of view of a sort of younger colleagues, such as you are, and then we can go more in details of different aspects, if you think this is appropriate. So, and there are a few aspects of the matter. How do I prepare such a grant application, especially at EU level? And these aspects concern, let's say, content in terms of what we should put in there. How do you select? How do you pick your topics? And then there is the point of how you present your content, your scientific ideas, and then maybe there is also the aspect of, the other things which go around it, which are, the different specific things, not just of some talks about, of some calls about, the topic that you want to address, but also, things such as impact, relevance, societal, this and that. Okay? So, as I said, first is content, then is presentation, and then is what is around. And then another aspect, I would say, is if it is not an individual grant that you're applying for, but it is a cooperation grant, so what does it mean, to cooperate and to coordinate? And then, of course, this has two aspects. One aspect of cooperation is if you are just part of a team, like for instance you are helping a PI to formulate their thing, their grant application, or maybe in the future if you are coordinating. Yeah. So those would be the different aspects that I think are worthwhile considering. Now, I may already ask our people, our friends who are listening, whether there is any other, say, title of topics that you would like me to address, so that you would like me already put it, let's say, in the menu, in the index of in the table of contents for today's talk. And I do not hear anything. I don't know if...
So, people, just write on the chat. I will say it aloud. So, if you have topic suggestion, please write it in the chat.
Okay, very good. All right. So, let's see. Let's start from how you pick the content of what you do. So this might seem a trivial question, because you may say, okay, there is something which I'm doing for my PhD, and I would like to propose it to, some funding agency to fund. So you may think, I have some ideas, like they are in my papers which I published, or in my thesis, and then, of course, I can formulate this, and since it is interesting stuff, then they will decide to fund it. And this is deeply wrong for many reasons. The first is that it is interesting for you, but it is not at all clear that anybody else should care. And the second is that maybe the call you are applying for is looking for something else. And on one end, both of these things that I just said seem, kind of discouraging and maybe negative. But instead, I would argue that they are positive. in the sense that, the aspect about why should anyone else care, well, this is a very important aspect of, asking the question of what is the relevance of what you do for other colleagues, because probably you are very enthusiastic about what you do, and you have good reasons, actually. And actually, I believe that everybody else should care and should be very interested by what you are doing, because I am sure, and I've seen it in the presentations that you gave at some things that I saw at the school, and I know, because our project is a very exciting one, that what you are doing, I'm positive, is very exciting, very good, everybody should care. But, it's a matter of not only being able to communicate it, and I know that there are several initiatives also in Cusco for soft skills, such as how do I present things, how do I convince other people, and so on. So one point is about how you communicate your stuff so that it is relevant and interesting and makes other people enthusiastic, and this is of course something which connects to the point that we will discuss in a moment, which is about presentation. But also, the point is relevance. So you should start wondering, okay, you have gotten a problem which someone has given you, your supervisor typically. And while exploring, you are already, broadening the boundaries of that. You are going in some further directions which, are even more interesting than the initial idea. But it is an important point of any scientific undertaking, including grant application, to ask yourself the question, how can I make this that I'm doing more interesting, more relevant for as many people as possible? Here we are speaking about colleagues, so other colleagues which could find, from a scientific point of view, what you do, instructive, relevant, stimulating. And this is the first thing which is important, because the people who will evaluate your grant are some colleagues, such as the reviewers in a journal, the reviewers for your grant application. They are essentially, you should think in the first place, people like you, which do not know all the details of what you are doing, and they would like to be entertained. They would like to be made enthusiastic about your stuff. And this happens, on one hand, if you are able to show, to communicate, to almost infect them with your enthusiasm. But on the other hand, if you show that you are able and willing to look beyond your own plate, beyond your own horizon, maybe possibly even beyond the horizon of your research group, to identify things which are relevant for other people. So in this sense, your successful grant application, which is in the title of today's discussion, it really starts when you go to a conference, when you go to a school, when you read the papers. Because the first element of success is that you do something which, you propose something which other people find great. And you have to be aware of what is happening in your community, what is happening in the literature, what is happening essentially beyond what happens in your group, because this is the first thing that not only will give you more ideas, but it will also give you a feeling for what your peers consider important. Okay? So this general, this broad sense of feeling, having an intuition for what other people consider important and exciting is the basis for everything. Now, these important things can have, the importance of your work can have a different meaning for different types of people. What I just discussed is scientists. So if you talk to scientists, and this is also why it's very important for you to go to conferences, to give your talks, to present your posters, to listen very carefully to people's feedback, then you have addressed, or you are learning to address one category of people, your colleagues. Another important category, which is as important in applying for a grant from some, for instance, European call, is the funding institution. So different funding institutions in different calls have different goals. There is something that they want. You know, the foundation of everything is understanding what people want. And those people are, as I said, the reviewers, and they want to find something interesting. They want a little bit of fun. They want to understand what you are saying. And this has effect on what we were going to say before, what we're going to say afterwards. But another important element is not only the colleagues which evaluate your proposal, they have their own wishes, they want something, but also the funding agency, which is putting money, they also want something, they have some goals. And those goals can be very, very diverse. So, for instance, the goal of the Marie Curie program is, as you know, because you are part of it, is to find bright young people, to support them, and in this case, the content of what they are doing is not in the foreground, not in the sense that it is irrelevant, that you have to be bright and young, and then you can work on some unimportant stuff and nobody cares. But in the sense that there is no prescription of which kind of things you should achieve with your research. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, research can have very different aims, can have very different objectives, can have very different results. One result of research is, of course, as we know, publishing a paper with some new knowledge that you develop. But another aspect of research can be, to create the basis to develop new technologies, new devices, new products. And this, of course, is also partially relevant to what we do in quantum sensing, in the Cusco project. Different levels of that are possible. So there could be some research which is, working towards application in the sense of developing and exploring some new ideas. So new ideas not just for the sake of knowledge, but new ideas also for the sake of enabling a better performance of some devices, in our case, sensing devices. Yeah? The better performance of these devices in turn can be relevant for different people. Because, for instance, as you have already experienced probably in your first year or so of PhD, there may be some applications of quantum sensing which only have an impact on science, such as, studying the properties of some materials, or, analyzing, the function of the brain for understanding the brain. And of course, in one case, this is an application, an impact of your research, which goes towards another branch of physics. In the case in which it is about understanding the brain, it's something which goes towards biology. But there is also the possibility of applying quantum sensing, for instance, to medicine, not only in terms of better understanding the human body and its function, but possibly also in terms of better diagnostics, in the sense that someone may want to use a quantum sensor, not so much for, getting new knowledge about the human body works, but maybe just for getting more efficient data to see if you have a certain disease or not. So these goals are vastly different goals. And on one hand, you have to be clear yourself what the goal of your research and of what you are proposing should be, but at the same time, so which is what you want to achieve, but at the same time, you have to get a good picture of what the people who give you money want. So, for instance, it is very different to put in an application for a quantum sensing device for, say, a medical nuclear magnetic resonance imaging company, or for, I don't know, the European Research Council, maybe in the future for you. So the European Research Council is only interested in the scientific aspect, and a company developing NMR is only interested in how much is the efficiency, how much does it cost, how robust is this thing, because you have to use really in a hospital. So those are really different aspects, different aims that the different institutions, organizations may have, which influence very deeply what the evaluation of a project is. Even the same institution will have calls which have vastly different scope. The European Commission is here in the focus of our conversation, and certainly the European Commission has calls which are targeting, as we mentioned, the European Research Council, some fundamental science. They have calls which are funding and targeting application of technologies such as PET in future and emerging technologies. In the future, there will be calls on the European Innovation Council, which go even more downstream, as we say, towards industry commercialization. So it's really a very broad range. The first mistake that even very senior, seasoned scientists make when they put in a proposal is to not take enough seriously they call boundaries, they call prescriptions, what the funding agency wants. And again, one motivation for doing this often is that one says, oh, I am doing some very interesting stuff, of course everybody should be interested, and so I will formulate it, and then it is evident that, this should be worthwhile. And even one could say, oh, this is a very applied call for proposals. But indeed, what I'm doing is very interesting, but is not so applied. So let me propose it there, and since it is so interesting, they should fund it. So, on one end, there is some merit here, because if you are doing some great stuff, definitely, I agree, there should be a possibility of finding support for it. And certainly, one should not, just choose the topic of the research only as a function of the money that they can find. Okay, so that would not be good. On the other hand, the opposite extreme, which I also think is not very positive, is when one reduces themselves to just proceed, continue in what they are doing, and they are not willing to update, to change, to modify. In this case, having a call which is demanding something from you, which maybe is not exactly what you were doing, which maybe is not exactly what you feel comfortable doing, still might be an excellent proposition, might be an excellent means for developing your career and your science at all levels, not only when you are young, such as you are now, but also in the future. Why am I saying this? Because, in fact, our own field, so this is my experience, in the last about 20 years, really evolved And in the beginning, our community was more like a bunch of people, great scientists, doing great stuff, which they wanted to continue doing, but not necessarily so much in cooperation with others or in coordination. And as the first calls for collaborative projects came out, people were forced, for instance, to look for the interdisciplinary dimension of what they were doing. And in the beginning, this might have been a little bit uncomfortable, and people might have felt that this was not really exactly what they wanted to do. But over time, this interdisciplinary dimension, so the direction which the calls for proposals put into what we were doing, was an exceptional stimulus for, new developments, for people taking their knowledge outside of the context in which it was already applied and bringing it further, bringing it beyond those boundaries. And examples are, for instance, mathematical theory, even control. The whole control theory was, it emerged from quantum chemistry, so not really, or chemical physics, you could say it, not really, in the context of quantum technologies, but some of the PIs of this network, we at some point saw that there would be opportunities for this outside of the standard area of application, and these opportunities came because of these calls. And so, listening to what the calls wanted, we were sort of motivated to find out new creative ways of applying these ideas outside of the usual domain. One aspect of what the calls are demanding from us is not only the topic, like, they want you to develop something for a certain specific aim. It's not only the level of technology readiness, as they call it, so of applicability of what we are doing. It's also the aspect of, for instance, cooperation and intra-European coordination between different actors. Once again, this is something which does not come automatic. But if you are sort of forced by a funding agency, via a call, to think systematically together with other colleagues, then this is indeed leading you into broadening your horizon and coming up with ideas which otherwise you would not have. So, this is to say that while it costs us some engagement, some investment, maybe some stress to wonder what our colleagues would like and to wonder what our funding agencies would like, in the end, what we get out of this is a much better result, which makes for much more fun and much more success also on our part. So, this was, let's say, the first part of this conversation, and actually I am improvising the structure of this conversation as we speak, so I have not prepared this, but this first part on content is what occurs to me, sort of to get the conversation started. Now, we could have some questions already now, including because since I don't have a presentation, and I'm just speaking, it might be much more difficult to stay awake. And so we could try to get an interruption for you, not for me, but for you. We might try to get some interruption to make it more interactive and try to see how you react to this and which questions you have and so on. And I still do not hear anything.
People, if you have questions, please demute yourself and ask if you don't want to write in the chat. It will be great if we use this great opportunity of Tommaso being online to answer your question. So,
hi, I was wondering,
please.
can I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Alistair Marshall. I just wanted to ask, so you said earlier that you should try to get colleagues excited. So for funding rounds with the EU, do you ever get told who's looking at your project or who's assessing whether or not it's an interesting thing to do? Or is that all sort of kept closed and you just submit an application to a black box and then you hear back from them?
That is a very, very important question, because it is, in fact, one of the foundations of the peer review system, that you are never, ever going to know who is reviewing your proposal. And why is that? The reason is that you must be sure, as much as possible, which you never totally are, but as much as possible, you must be sure, if you are a funding agency, that the evaluation of the quality of the proposal that you get submitted and you should decide whether you fund, that the evaluation is as independent as possible from any personal element, both in the positive and in the negative sense. So if you knew who your reviewer is, and this person is a friend, then they might be, for instance, be induced to evaluate your work more favorably than they would otherwise do. So they could add a positive bias if they know that you will not only read what they write, but also know that they have written it. You might shy away from some perhaps legitimate criticism because you do not want that some friend of yours knows, or some colleague knows, that you have criticized them. Or maybe if you are not a friend, but you are a student, or maybe someone who is not at the end of the top of their career, and you write something negative on some important person who might have an effect on your future career, then you would be very careful because you criticize them. So this freedom to criticize, or also to appreciate, to put a positive evaluation without any prospect of the people knowing that it's you, and so without the possibility for people then to, let's say, thank you or give you something in return, this is all elements which are supposed to enhance the quality and reliability of review reports. Of course, this depends on everybody abiding by the ethical rule, which typically you sign when you are asked to evaluate such projects, that there must be confidentiality and that no one should ever know that you have evaluated a certain proposal. And this is among the foundations of what happens in peer review. As a matter of fact, especially in our field, this is how it works. You do not know the name of the reviewer, but the reviewer knows the name of the people who proposed. In other fields, which are, maybe less linked to some objective criteria, such as in science, but in some fields like in humanities, for some grants, or even from some journals there, they use a double-blind procedure in which the names of the, not only the reviewers, but also the names of the proponents are not known to the reviewers. And such a method is used also to some extent in FET and other channels of the European Commission, in FET proposals. So that, even if you have some enemy and you get a proposal from them, you may be tempted, and you know it is from them, you may be tempted to give them a worse mark. But if you do not know, it could be your enemy, it could be your friend, since, we are all humans and, we want to prevent human dynamics to get in the way of a fair evaluation, we, in some cases, avoid that this happens so that you get an evaluation as objective as possible. Now, it is never truly objective, of course, and then we will discuss later on how you can make your case to get an evaluation as good as possible. But somehow, one foundation, one cornerstone of this is the fact that the reviewers are anonymous. I hope that did answer your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, do we have any other questions at this stage?
Any additional question? Anyone?
Okay, so maybe they are sleeping on their desks. So let's try to help them a little more in their sort of afternoon nap. So the following topic I am going to address is how you present your stuff. Now, the assumption is some colleague will read my proposal. So I can, present some, as a scientist, I can present some technical details. It makes sense, they will understand. You also provide references, if they want to go and have some background reading, and so on. This is very deeply wrong. You should always assume, when you write your proposal, not only that your reviewer knows nothing of what you are writing, but also that your reviewer does not care and has something more interesting to do. Why is that? Well, first, the reason why you should assume the person knows nothing is that in most cases, you will be evaluated by a few people, and some of them will have a competence in your field, but some of them are maybe explicitly looked intentionally searched for being outside of your field, because your funding agency wants to be sure that your stuff is interesting, is clear, is well written, not just by someone who is, broadly your friend because they are in the same field as yours and so they want to support. Like if you get a guy working on nanodiamonds, okay? Or let's say on quantum sensing, and you're in a competition and there is projects on quantum sensing, on quantum computing, and on, raising bananas. So if there is an expert in quantum computing or in quantum sensing which, reads some banana proposal or some broccoli proposal, and also the quantum sensing proposal, of course they will say, bananas and broccoli, they are not interesting, I want to have computing and sensing. That's kind of obvious. So they will look into the details, and if there is something wrong, they will be able to tell it. But your funding agency wants to say, oh, now I have several projects on quantum sensing. Which ones do I pick? I want some project which is not only appreciated by people who do quantum sensing already. That's obvious. I want a proposal which even the banana and broccoli expert will say, oh, wow, this is cool. So, why this? It makes sense on one hand. Of course, we often complain that our proposals get read by people who have insufficient knowledge in our field, which of course is a downside. But what is the upside of this? Because nothing is black or white, obviously. The upside of this is that if you have a proposal which can be so evidently interesting that not only a specialist, but also a person from outside your field will see the merit in it, then it might have better chances than a competing proposal. And very often, in a tight competition, with many competing proposals, such as we witness even more and more frequently in recent years, what happens is that what decides in the end, what is really what makes the difference afterwards, is not so much, what your colleagues from quantum something think, but it's some half sentence in which some referee, which typically is maybe not so familiar, says like, oh, I don't understand how this goes, or oh, I'm not convinced by that. Maybe even in a half sentence. And of course, you have explained how it goes. And of course, you get angry because the guy did not understand. But, and of course, you are right to say that if you explain it, the people should understand it. However, the fact is that nobody will read your proposal with the same care that you have put in writing it. And it's not because they do not like you, it is because they get too many proposals which are too long for them to read, so they have to maybe read it once or maybe even skim through it. And if there is some information which is less than extremely evident, and information which is less than popping out of the page and jumping at them, they may miss it. And so, even though, in principle, if you have written something in a footnote, you have written it in the proposal and it should be evaluated, in practice, there is this famous wisdom sentence which says, in theory and practice are the same, but in practice they are different. And so, in theory, you should expect that everything you write gets read, but in practice, if it is not very, very evident, very in the foreground, the important information, then you have a problem. So, how to solve that? How to make sure that your presentation fulfills that aim to make everything pop out of the page? Well, there are different tricks. One trick, which is very simple, is using boldface in your presentation. So that in the page, what comes out is immediately evident, and if one only reads the boldface, they should be able to get an impression of everything. Second, for this impression of everything to be hopefully sufficiently faithful to what you have already written, or you have actually written, these things that you make evident should reflect a very clear structure. So in your proposal, there should be a very clear structure. What is the main idea? What are the, where does it come from? What are the implications? What are the methods? And so on and so forth. Very often, the structure is suggested by the text of the call. The text of the call and the templates are another thing which get very easily ignored by people who write proposals. Because you think, oh, this is just general blah blah. But every single word, every single sentence of the template that you get, of the text of the call, is something which is extremely important for helping you structure your the way in which you present things. And this is, first of all, as a clear structuring and presentation of your ideas, but not only for that. Also because when the reviewers have to make their evaluation, they have typically some criteria. And these criteria are how novel is the approach, and how reliable is that the results will be achieved, and how applied or how fundamental is the development of knowledge, and how credible is the competence of the applicant, and so on and so forth. And often they have to read your text and find some anchors, some parts of text which enable them to substantiate some judgment. So if you follow these aspects, typically the criteria for the call are published in advance, and you now prepare. Like the main idea is like taking the reviewer by the hand and offering them whatever they have to write in the report on a golden plate. So that in an effortless way, they will understand what you are doing, and they will see how it relates to the call, and it will provide them with exactly the right points to make when they write the report and they say what you are working about. And this is the things that your structure in paragraphs and sub-paragraphs and your boldface and your highlighting things and you're creating bullet lists and so on should convey. And this, if it makes it easy for them, it will give them a good feeling, because they don't want to have to search and dig for information in your text. They want the information to emerge almost by itself. So the more, by following that structure that the call is giving you, by following any information that you have on what the call aims are and what the questions will be that will be asked to the reviewers, which typically are published, these questions, the more you do that, the more you will make it easy for them to retrieve that information, so they don't have to hunt for it, but they can find it, and the more they will have a good feeling, and they will develop a sense that what you are writing is actually great, and that you have some good ideas, and that you can really develop them, and you know what you're talking about, and all of this is coming to an important extent from the way in which you present and you formulate the clarity of your arguments. So much for presentation, because I said that we would have about 1 hour for my initial discussion and then more time for questions. And now I see that we are already 45 minutes inside our talk, and so I am wondering whether there are any questions on this introduction I gave on the presentation aspect.
So Marva has a general question, which is, do we need to be realistic in the proposal and be sure we will achieve everything we propose, or be more creative, revolutionary, even if it means we are unsure to achieve what we propose?
So the answer is, it depends on the call. There are some calls which are high risk, high gain, in which it is accepted that you propose something more visionary, even though it is not clear whether you will be able to do everything. And actually, if you already write what you are sure that you will achieve, this may give, in such high risk, high gain proposals, or maybe in such calls as like ERC, in which a broad vision is required, you may give the impression that you are not visionary at all, you are doing only incremental research, and not much is going to come out of your work. Yeah? And this would be, of course, be deadly in those cases. On the other hand, the opposite end of the spectrum is some calls in which you must deliver everything by the deadline. One famous example of this is calls by the European Space Agency, which you probably do not have to deal with, but just to give an example, those calls are such that you say, I will do this because it's like a part which goes on a rocket, and you're going to be paid your 1 million euros if you deliver that thing in time for someone else to take your engine or whatever and put it actually on the rocket. And this person has also some deadline, so they have to start by the time in which I give it to them. So if in the contract for that grant it's written, and I'm not kidding, this is a real example, it's written that you are going to have your device delivered at noon on July 1st, and you deliver the same thing at 5 p.m. on July 1st, you are not going to get the 1 million euros. And you have to pay your research out of some other sources. This is a very concrete thing which actually happens, and so you see that this is a completely different type of call and of funding research and development than in something like, for instance, the ERC, and they are both European institutions. But depending on the goals, depending on what they want, in one case they want to maximize the possibility that you do something great and maybe unexpected. In the other case, they don't care about the unexpected, they want to be sure that your piece is there in place when the rocket has to start. So what they want is different, the goals of the calls are different, and this has a very strong influence to the level of risk that you can put in your proposal. To understand that, again, it's very important to read carefully all the documents from the call and also possibly to get advice from senior colleagues or from the information contact points, which are essentially nowadays in all institutions in Europe, in universities and other research organizations, in which there are specialists who can advise you on that. This kind of advice is essential to hit the right level, not only the right level between science and application and whatever, as I said before, but also, as your very important question points out, the right level between, very safe but possibly incremental approach or very innovative at high risk. They have value of different level in different contexts. Did this answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Most welcome.
So next question from Shaima. You can unmute yourself and ask away.
Yes, so my question was about the structure of the text. So I wanted to know how explicitly do we have to write about where will the money be spent? Like, do we have to exactly mention, okay, it will be spent on this lab equipment? Like, how specific should that description be?
Also in this case, this kind of requirement is expressed in the call. So there will be calls which will require you to detail this even in more detail than what you have just said, but maybe even attaching some quotes from some supplier company for a particular piece of equipment, for instance. There are calls like that. There are other calls which just more broadly require you to prepare an overview of the money that you want to spend there. So it really depends. The point is, again, you have to check very carefully what the call wants, but in general, if you're not entirely sure, more detail, more concrete is important. It should not be, again, so it's a detail that serves the purpose of carrying the reviewer by the hand. So if you carry the reviewer by the hand and on the golden plate you present them with a staple of 800 pages Excel table, that is a lot of detail, but it is not going to be usable for them. The level of detail should be always commensurate at least with the requests of the call, but also such that a reviewer, by looking at it, by reading it, should be able to get an opinion whether what you are doing is reliable and whether you know what you are doing. So it depends also on your field, it depends on the type of expenditure, it depends on whether it is standard or non-standard. The rule of thumb is you have to convince a colleague who does not know your stuff that what you are doing is reliable. And so that you have also a clear plan and you are not leaving something to the chance. Does this answer your question?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Any other question?
So other questions, anyone? Well, I might ask a question myself, then see if this stimulates a little bit the people. And it's about terminology used in by the Commission. if you think that sometimes, at the beginning at least, people might not clearly understand what the Commission wants because they use specific buzzword that one needs to be familiar with.
Yes, that is a very good point. In fact, when I say, read carefully, it's not just reading carefully what is in the text as it is, but it's about reading carefully and familiarizing yourself with the buzzwords, with the technical terms, with possibly the jargon that is used there, because all of these are aspects which then reflect themselves in the criteria for the reviewers and ultimately in the way in which the reviewers will look at your proposal, fishing for that information which responds to specific jargon aspects of the call. One aspect is impact, on which I will come back in a while. And also here, there are more senior colleagues which are familiar with this. There are these consultancy offices which are there to help you understand these things. It's important to be aware, so you can find information and help and advice on how to interpret these things. It's important to be aware that it deserves your attention, even though sometimes to a scientist it might look like some empty words or buzzwords. Indeed, it is something which is instead very, very relevant to understand in order to make an effective proposal. Does this answer your question, Mattia?
Of course, thanks a lot. I think then if there isn't any question, we can move to the next point, I would say.
Very good. So in the next point, I was indeed, as I announced before, thinking towards some of these jargon aspects. Yeah. So one aspect is impact of your research. And typically this is something which one tends to overlook, or maybe to think, oh, yes, I need, typically one says, oh, this is some blah blah I have to put in there. And then one tries to do copy and paste from something, and maybe one says, okay, my important part is my science, the reviewer is a scientist, they will judge my science, so I should do some very strong scientific part, and then I will write something on, impact, relevance for society, broader relevance, whatever it is. And this is deeply wrong, because the reviewers have to judge also that, precisely because, of course, this aspect of impact, it seems vague to you, it seems vague to everybody. It is a challenge for everybody to write that. So it means that if you take it seriously, you will be able to emerge. Because it may be very difficult between two proposals which are excellently written from the scientific point of view. Let's say you get maximum marks, and also your colleague gets maximum marks. And then how are you going to distinguish between the two proposals, which one is worth funding? Well, if it was only on the scientific aspect, it may be very difficult. So often, very often, some people say too often, what happens in practice is that really the difference is made by some tiny details in which one proponent has written some indeed original and new idea on how their research is going to have an impact outside science for society or whatever else, and then someone else, has written some standard things. In the end, in the scoring, for instance, for European projects, impact has a comparable weight to scientific excellence. And so, if you put all your effort in the scientific excellence, you will get very good marks, but then, also someone else will have good marks because, those funding channels are competitive, and then there will be other people who will do good stuff. But if you have an impact session which is less than perfect, then it will be straightforward to, use this and say, okay, great science, but, they have not thought carefully about impact or about management, which is the other important aspect. Maybe we come back to that in a moment. And then, your project might be killed on such really, if you wish, scientifically marginal aspects. So this is something which is to be taken very seriously. Now, what is this aspect of impact? This is, again, what I said before, in terms of why should anybody care about what you're doing, but this time, not asking the question in terms of which other scientists should be interested, but asking the question, why should this be relevant for society? Why should taxpayers fund this at all? So, what is the effect? Once you will have achieved this, the world will have changed, because if your project is successful and you manage to do what you promise, the world will have changed by this and that account. Because maybe people will be able to do things to measure something which they couldn't before, to see something which they couldn't before, to understand something which they couldn't before. This is scientific impact. Or maybe people will be able to perform some operations, some daily tasks even, in a way which was impossible before. Or maybe, a certain, concept, idea, material, device is going to be more robust. Or maybe it will be cheaper. Or maybe it will work at room temperature and not at very low temperature. Whereas, so, clarifying what would it bring, what's the value, what does the funding agency buy with your work? If it works, what will they have? What will society have at the end? This is not just a question of social responsibility, if you wish, it's also a question of really providing the reviewers with ammunition, with arguments to defend you and to say why it should be your proposal and not someone else's proposal. Because, of course, the success rate in these funding channels are not very high. In some cases, they are very, very low. And so, it must be clear why people would like to spend their money on your idea. Okay? So that's what is relevant for impact. So they're not directly scientific excellence aspect. And another aspect which is also important in evaluations is management or implementation, which is connected to one question we have been asked before, namely, how are we going to use our resources? How is the plan? Do we have a contingency plan, like if something goes wrong, not the way I was foreseeing, how do we react? What are the alternatives? How do we recognize that we have to change? When are the points in time in which we make that decision? This is also the perennial discussion involving milestones and deliverables. Very many people get their project not so highly ranked in the implementation and management part because of an insufficient clarity in distinguishing milestones and deliverable. So, a deliverable is something that you, as the word says, deliver. You do something, you achieve a result, and after that, at a certain point in time, you have a certain calculation which you are able to carry out, a certain publication which you are publishing in a journal or on the archive. You have a certain device which can do some task, and these are the concrete outputs, the things that your project will deliver, with a timeline which also should work like not every single thing is independent, but they are concatenated in a logical way, in the sense that I deliver a first thing, and then a first, I don't know, calculation which allows me to better understand the property of some quantum system, and then having this calculation, this is a first deliverable, and then it comes a simulation which uses that to predict some properties of some device, and this is another deliverable, and this is fed into a certain realization of a prototype, which is another deliverable. So those are deliverables. Those get often confused with milestones, and a milestone instead is a point in time in which a decision is made. It's like a real milestone on a road in which you are wondering, okay, where have I arrived? Should I move on? Should I go left here? Should I go right there? Is everything on track? Do I need to take some corrective action? Because maybe, for instance, to deliver a certain calculation which works perfectly, I have to be sure that a series of milestones are met. Like, identifying the problem, modeling the problem, setting up the code, and so on. And at each of these milestones, I can see, okay, now, is it working? Is it not working as I expected? Do I need to change things? So you see that, again, connected to the question, high risk, how much should we promise, how much should we be sure? Well, the important thing is that you have a clear plan to implement your ideas, in the sense that if there is something which we don't know whether it will work or not, then we can ask, and this is a milestone, at a certain point in time, we will check whether this is working or not, and if it is working, we will use it further, and if it is not, we will update, change plans. So all of these aspects, which also go with this, charts, diagrams, which you do with, these bars, the so-called Gantt chart, which is, showing, throughout the time how the different parts of the work and different tasks of the work are interconnected. And the tasks could be, as I mentioned, creating some calculation, applying to some simulation, whatever else. So those are tasks. Or also, on a broader level, work packages. Okay? In a broader project, and we'll come back to the aspect of cooperation, there are work packages and so on. Which may be composed by tasks, and you have to represent how they are interconnected. What is the sequence? How they feed one into the other? Do you have different tasks just going on in parallel? Well, if this is the case, people may ask, well, why then do you want to do this project with all these things together? Is it just a linear sequence A to B and then B to C and so on? People may ask, well, what happens if B goes wrong, then does everything else fall apart? So all these questions have to be answered with these charts, and one is the Gantt chart, which is this thing of the different tasks in a sequence. Another one is a PERT diagram, which is a diagram which shows the interconnections, the logical interconnections, not so much in time and in planning, but the logical interconnections between the different parts of the project, different work packages and different topics and so on. All of this has to be very clear, and it has to reflect the structure that you have for your work packages, for your tasks, and should be reconnected in the end to the goals that you have. So, summarizing this part that we have now, one should not only look at the call and select the topic and see why it should be interesting, but then also identify what is the overarching goal of your project, what are the different objectives that you need to achieve, and from these follows the different parts of the work you want to perform, the different tasks, which all have to be a consequence, a transparent consequence of your overarching goal. Here's what I want to do, and here's how I do it, and how I organize myself in order to do it. So from the overarching goal come the objectives, and then different tasks, and then they are connected to each other in an implementation plan which says how they feed into each other, and when they give rise to deliverables, when are milestones which are control points in which the different tasks are maybe connected to see how to proceed, and in the end, also the aspect of how to manage, how to organize, how many resources, how many, where does the money go to, has to appear just as a consequence, like you walk, as we said before, the reviewer, through all the concept, also with a clear structure, from the goal that you have down to the different activities that you carry out and the resources you need for that, and then they will say, oh, this is a great project, and we must fund it, and the person knows what they are doing. So this was the part, say the third part of the conversation, which was more on this aspect of the sort of more non-scientific, less hard, but maybe more soft parts on impact and implementation, and how to argue for them, and what should go there, and how to link them up to the general goals of the project. Do we have any questions?
Any question? Anyone?
So is everybody really so deeply asleep? I don't know. Is your webinars are they always so disastrous, or sometimes they also get interactive?
I think they are a bit not scared, but they feel they might be scared of asking the wrong question, but there is no wrong question. The wrong question doesn't exist. So let's see somebody
offer a free lunch, violating the no free lunch theorem, to anyone who manages to ask me a stupid question.
We have a contendant. Joking, Shaima would like to ask a question. So please unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is, how do you find these EU calls? Because quite often it happens, these calls come and go, and it's like, is there a common portal where it's sort of advertised and?
Yes. So I am very sorry, but you missed the prize, because this is very far from a stupid question. So how do you find that? Well, there are different channels. In principle, there is the participant portal of the European Commission, but this is too vast, and it is really not manageable to go and look for everything. And as you say, of course, calls get published there, but they come and go, and so if you don't know it, as a matter of fact, you should know in advance when a call will be published. Because if you know about a call after it is published, probably it is already late. An exception is, of course, and this is valid, of course, for the calls on specific topics. On the other hand, the calls which are sort of more regular, like the Marie Curie fellowships, for instance, and stuff like that, they happen at regular intervals, and so it is possible to know that there is a certain scheme or ERC which will be published, and you can apply for that. To start with, I would strongly recommend really to go to your university. There are certainly some people, at least a small office, which maintains some sort of lists, links, portals, and so on, where you can look for these things. So this on the general level. On the specific level for quantum technologies, because our project Cusco is a quantum sensing project, in that case, we also have a web portal, qt.eu, on which we try to feed most of this information, and there are constantly news items there which are pointing at what is being developed in the community. and for the community. So, getting some subscription, for instance, to a newsletter, such as this qt.eu for quantum, but also other websites which inform you periodically about funding opportunities, is certainly a good advice, because both for quantum and outside of quantum, the situation is so complex and confusing that nobody by themselves will be able to get all this information, that there are people who are gathering that information and serving it to you. So the important thing is to get onto those portals, to get onto those newsletters, and to get that information from your advisory office in your university for third-party funding. Do we have any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, since I see no more question, I might ask another question, if you don't mind, Tommaso. And it's about the impact. And again, one thing I always find curious when dealing with proposal writing in the impact is the societal change. So how bold one should be in addressing this point. Because I always see that you, for instance, spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I'm wondering how far would you get in this part, which is not scientific, directly related to the science promise, but nevertheless is relevant.
Yes. So I would say that it's important to go as visionary as possible, but not more visionary. In the sense that one should really apply here, in my opinion, a zero policy, such that you are avoiding very grand claims that something will come, the world will be changed, and so on and so forth, but you say more like what might be the implication, what may come, unless you are very sure that something is coming, and you try to be as honest as possible, because also this part of impact. Normally we write it, many people write it by thinking of the funding agency, and they think like, oh, the scientific part is for my colleagues, and the impact part is for the funding agency, so it's fine if I do a little bit of bullshitting there. But no, there should be no exaggeration, because also that part is evaluated by colleagues, and so you should make some statements which may be visionary, which may be bold, but it should be objective, and it should be something which you would feel comfortable writing in a letter to your colleague, to your supervisor, or to your peers. So it should not be something which appears to be ridiculous in any way. So that's very important for this, and finding the balance is difficult. And if you are not experienced with this, you may ask your supervisor for support on that. But it's important to sort of understand that this is an essential element, and learning this is very helpful for your career. Even though it seems that this is not directly scientific, and in fact it isn't directly scientific, and so you may think, maybe, will it really be helpful for me? But no, it's really important to get it and to learn soon enough how to find that balance.
Okay, thank you very much. So I see that we have 15 minutes left, so we might tackle the next point and then have some
sorry, I had...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please, Alistair.
So I just want to ask, is there a larger probability of getting a project if you're a senior researcher compared to a young researcher, or should it not? I guess in theory it shouldn't matter at what point in your career you're at, but have you ever encountered a sort of bias like that?
Well, there certainly is a bias in favor of young people, certainly for a lot of projects such as Marie Curie and training and stuff like that. There are also projects specifically targeting people in their early career, such as the starting grant from ERC, and those are biased in favor of younger people. When there is a general project addressing some specific challenges, typically this bias is not present. So what matters, so it is very possible that a young person with a good publication record, like density of high-level papers per year, so to say, can get a better evaluation than an older person which maybe does not have such high productivity. So productivity is rather what makes a difference there in the evaluation. Yeah, when they judge your output and your competence.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now for the last about 10 minutes, the final element I wanted to mention is the aspect of cooperation, because there are grants which are individual grants, such as ERC, for instance, is a typical example, but there are also, especially in our field, a lot of scientific collaboration grants. So you might be involved in such a grant now as part of a larger collaboration, perhaps in the future also as a coordinator. Now, being a coordinator requires a lot of work in terms of, running around, connecting people, and trying to find out what is the common denominator among all of them and what everybody wants. And it requires this, of course, to an extent which is much larger than if you are simply a partner. But even if you are a partner, it is essential in such a larger collaborative project to be able to establish those connections. Why? Because in a collaborative project, you are not just evaluated in terms of what we said before, scientific ideas, scientific excellence, presentation, impact, implementation, but you are also evaluated for the extent to which you can make collaboration and cooperation actually happen in your project. Okay? So this aspect is something which you have to be aware and can and should contribute to, even if you are simply a partner of a project. And this requires and consists in looking for thematic overlaps, connections, possibilities that might arise from the interaction with other partners in the project, both those which you might have already collaborated with, as well, and perhaps especially those who are new to you, but maybe are in the same project, because this might represent some opportunity to develop something which is even more new, more beyond what you have already done, something which gives more the clear impression that funding this collaborative project is needed because it will bring some effect which would otherwise not be available. This aspect of cooperation and of links and joint tasks contributes also to getting the broad picture about how you implement, how can you be successful in realizing something. Because typically in a collaborative project, it's about bringing competence together to achieve some goals which are not to be achieved otherwise. For instance, if I want to create a quantum sensing device with quantum control, okay, then I need some experimental group which can do quantum sensing, which can develop the hardware. I also need some theory group which can do control. And, I need maybe both a theory group which works on the mathematical aspect and some theory group which works on the more specific implementation aspect. And in fact, if you look at the structure of our consortium, if you look at the topics which all the different PhD students that we have are working on, you will see that these different competencies are there. And this was among the foundation which our coordinator, Christiane Koch, masterfully put together to really convince the European Commission that, yes, they must fund us, because we are going to learn from each other, and we are going to bring the whole field forward. This is also the reason for the specific measures that we have, like these secondments, and all the fact that each one of you is going to other nodes for extended periods of time. So this is something that was conceived before we started as a way to not only show synergy for the sake of showing it, but also to really develop synergy as a means to enrich your experience. I am pretty sure that everyone, or maybe at least most of you, is seeing, learning, developing, opening their horizons by going to other nodes in the network much more than what they could do if they just stayed there and they talked on Skype. This is going to open your mind also for the future ability of granting successful grant applications. This is an essential part, and again, like the other ones, it requires effort in understanding what it takes, what are the different aspects, in presenting clearly to the reviewers how those aspects come together, in highlighting what is the relation of this cooperation, not as an end in itself, but as a means to an end, which is, in our Marie Curie network, of course, to enhance, to give you the best possible training, but also to bring about the strongest possible progress in the field of quantum sensing. So the cooperation is something which is very relevant for all of this, and even if you are still not coordinating something, but at a young age, as you are supporting maybe a PI in writing their proposal, this is really an area in which, as much as in the scientific content and brainstorming and ideas, you can bring your own contribution, also here, you are the ones who travel around. Each one of you can spend at another node much, much more time than any of your PIs can do. So this is a great resource for being supportive, understanding, contributing, gathering, and contributing ideas to the joint undertaking that we are having. And this also reflects itself in the whole structure. So when you are writing the proposal, also this cooperation is, added value, it's called. The European added value, or the added value coming from the fact that we are doing this together, has again to pop out of the page, to jump at the reviewer, so that they must say, oh yes, it is very clear, I know. This project, if it was done individually by each partner in the different places, would not be so effective as it will be now that they are doing it together. So much. And we have 4 minutes more for this cooperation part. Of course, many things can be added there, but at this point, in these 4 minutes, I may wonder whether there are any questions.
So there is a question from Marva. Please, Marva, unmute yourself, and then we will have Shima again.
Okay, then my question is more related to the topics in general. Like, is there any tendency for which topic Europe will invest, and can we know that?
Yes. So, a few days ago, the Commission has published a policy paper in which they outline the topics they want to invest on, and those have to do with climate change, with environment, with health, and with the topics connected to that, also with the security, cybersecurity. And so quantum technologies are connected to a good extent to those. The Commission is now starting a consultation, which I think is already online, in which everybody can provide input to that effect. And actually, one thing that I would like very strongly to be put on your calendars, on your agenda, is to participate in that consultation each one of you individually, and to put in your opinion, your feedback, that you think that quantum technologies, that quantum sensing, that quantum whatever is helpful for those certain challenges, and explaining why this is, and sort of raising your voice to support that. Because at the end, this whole thing will be evaluated, and depending, among other things, on how many people have supported which topics, this will lead to a final definition of the topics for future research. So it is essential that every one of us participates there and can really bring in their voice. And in doing so, you will also be able to see this document and to look at the general topics that the Commission is going to pursue, which are, among others, the ones that I mentioned.
So we will share all this information in an email afterwards. So between today and tomorrow, you will receive, and also the recommendation to subscribe to the mailing list of qt.eu. Now, Shaima has a question, right? Please unmute yourself and ask. And we have the last 2 minutes.
Yes. So my question is about the collaborative aspect. How do you find these partners that need to be part of the collaboration? Like, what is an efficient process to find the relevant partners?
So this is, of course, a very delicate and sophisticated aspect, which is typically the responsibility of the coordinator. And I'm saying this because this is the trickiest part of this whole business. And we could have a 1.5-hour seminar just on that specifically. What is important for you at this stage, I believe, is the realization that the foundation for all of this is a strong scientific foundation. In the sense that, the main reason why to involve partners is to make a strong and meaningful basis for the development of your project. And so how do you find those people? You find them because you engage in discussions, you network, you connect, you listen, you are curious about what people do in other fields of quantum sensing and of quantum technology, and even beyond, other than your one field. And by doing this, you will be gradually, you explore the landscape, you will be gradually aware of the landscape, and then when something will come, like there is a call on a certain topic, then you will know, oh, I know this group, there is this person, there is this student, they are doing that. And you might be able to suggest that as a potential avenue of further cooperation to your group, to your PI, and so on. And so at this stage, it's more about, for you, absorbing as much as possible information through the secondments, through your exchanges. You really are in a privileged situation now that you are in this Marie Curie network. This is not just a regular grant, it is much better than that, because it is a grant which comes with a network served on a golden plate to you. So you can exploit that, you can learn, you can explore. This is the best investment that you can do in order to be positioned in the future to identify the strongest possible constellations in order to bring forward such activities.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Very good.
So it's 3:30. I don't know, Tommaso, how much time you have left, if you have to rush.
I unfortunately have to go now, unless there is some last question.
Well, I would have a question, but I would leave it for the next time we will have you as a guest, because as you hinted, there is this interesting part about creating a consortium that we might want to have you back, if you wish to talk with us again.
If that is interesting, I will be pleased to do that.
Wonderful. Then thanks again, Tommaso.
Thanks a lot.
And we will be in touch. And now, Tommaso, you can go.
Okay.
I will have
Goodbye
to
now.
speak with...
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
So instead